and we'll just take it from there. Hey guys, it's your favorite Omar here today. I'm here with Christina from the local builder here in the area, and we are talking more about the real estate markets. We're going to talk about marketing. We're talking about finding the motivations and going forward. So, Christina, uh, start us off today. When you meet with somebody who is either looking to sell their house or trying to buy and they're unsure of the market, what's the first thing you tell them?
Well, I mean, I asked them what's going on in their neighborhood. Do they have any homes that are currently on the market? And if so, have they noticed if they're taking a long time to sell? Do they also have an agent who is really actively marketing the home for them and communicating with them?
Yeah.
I think it's very important.
Yeah, marketing is important, especially
Yeah.
if it's changing the market the way it is. I'm here in Florida. We're a neutral slash buyer's market, but it's changing nationwide. The days on market, the inventory is climbing nationwide, and a lot of other states are starting to feel what Florida felt 2 years ago now. And it's good to get ahead of that curve and say, okay, what is it that I'm doing? What am I going to change in my marketing to highlight a home?
Right.
So marketing is extremely important. What are some of the things that you would see commonly marketed in a home?
I think that videos are really important. I am watching a lot of different agents around the country who are talking about the same stuff that you're talking about
Yeah.
right now, which is they're seeing inventory increase. They're seeing the days on market increase. And it's not that the home won't sell, but it's what are people doing to actively market that property? So videos, holding broker opens in a different way to really get people to come in the door.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm hearing people that are doing well. They're implementing those types of strategies, different from just an open house and sticking the sign in the yard and posting it on Facebook and praying that someone shows up.
Yeah. Actually, I had a post I made months ago, and I called it the 3 Ps. But typically in the seller's market, that's what it was. It was they put on MLS, they put a sign in the yard, and they pray for someone else to sell it. But the I agree with you, right? When I think of marketing strategies, and we could go through them. What are the common things that we see almost all agents do, right? They'll take photos, they'll put on the MLS, maybe they'll do some aerial shots, and I think that's about it. They'll maybe hold some open houses. Those 3 or 4 strategies is common, right? Most agents nationwide will do at least that. Now, someone will do less and take photos with their phone. Don't do that, or whatever it may be, or not pay extra for aerial shots. It's not that expensive, right? Now, when the market changes, you got to do a little bit more, and that's where you have to increase your marketing. You have to increase that spend, especially if you're trying to do what's best for your client, or if you're doing it for yourself. A lot of agents sell their own homes, and you don't want to shortchange yourself. You wouldn't shortchange yourself, so don't do that to a customer. So what are other things that we could do, right? Like you said, we could be creative and have brokers opens, caravans. That's an old school thing, but caravans are coming back. We do that here in my brokerage. I know some people do the information binders and go to events in their communities and do that. There's real estate pitch groups you could find locally where they're pitching to other realtors any listings they have on the market and think that might be a good value to somebody, and then taking advantage of where the attention is, right? It could be social media, whether it's TikTok, Facebook, whoever it is, your target audience. If you're looking for first-time home buyers, you're probably going to find them on Instagram and TikTok, right? But if you're looking for somebody who is relocating, it might be on Facebook. So just knowing where you got to go, postcards, running ads,
Postcards still work?
Postcards do work, but it's one of those things where it's time on task over time.
Yeah.
Where it's a more of a farming technique.
Right.
However,
I feel like it's one of those things just to keep your name and your face in front of them.
Yeah, exactly. Mind share, right?
Yeah.
You want people to think of you first. It's like the whole thing of getting a billboard. Does a billboard work? Yes and no.
Right.
You're not gonna. I know plenty of people up north who do well, really well, and they spend a lot of money on billboards, but they don't get people calling them off the billboard. However, the fact that they're on every billboard, and you go into someone's house, whether they know it or not, it's like they recognize you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Might say, you might ask them, where did you hear about me?
Yeah.
And they might have seen that billboard 10 times, but they say, oh, I think I saw you on Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if you're watching a movie and you know the movie's about whatever the story is, but in there they're eating McDonald's 2 or 3 times, and you know they show it to, and the next thing you know, the next day you're like, you know what? I'm a little hungry. I think I'm gonna go to McDonald's. You're not thinking about that movie, but it was supplanted in your head. That's why these companies pay all that advertising and marketing dollar to be in those commercials and movies, because they know it's time on task over time. You know, they do it long enough, it will work.
Right. So I have a question for you then, because you're implementing a lot of video.
Yes, I am.
Aerials and all that. So how many homes have you sold because of doing those type of photography and video things and posting that to social media? Yeah.
So almost exclusively all my homes have video aerial work, some type of, whether it's a narration video. And so I would say all of them have that. Now, you know, am I tracking which one? So I can only think of a few off the top of my head that I know someone contacted me because they saw a TikTok or a video online or a YouTube and reached out to me and said, I want to know more about this home. So, you know, I'm sure there's other ways to track. Yeah, there's other ways to track it. My thing is, if you use it as common practice and you show them the home in the best light possible, you know, don't shortchange it. So do the video regardless, whether you think that's a bias thing, whether you think someone is going to like it or not, or people are self-conscious. I mean, I'm human.
Yeah.
I'm also self-conscious. Sometimes I take these videos and be like, there it is. Omar, you know, he's just, I didn't get a haircut that day, you know, or I'm looking whatever. So, you know, but you got to put that bias aside, do the video, and you don't know who is going to help, what value is going to bring somebody, and might sell someone's home that you're trying to help. So,
and people want to know you or me as a professional. What kind of person am I dealing with? You know, so video kind of helps to introduce myself and yourself to people out there, and you know, that's part of building the relationship and getting business.
Yeah.
Same thing with trying to sell your seller's home.
Yeah, I fully agree. I couldn't agree with that statement more. And even more on a personal standpoint, whether you post, whether it's for business or not, because there's plenty of people who are on Facebook and Instagram and they just post their hobbies, things that they're doing. And I think it's really cool. I think that's what social media is all about. I think that's what, you know, the innovation of technology is for. And it creates memories and stuff that you can show your kids and grandkids or whatever it may be. How awesome is that? I mean, if there was video and social media or these platforms 100 years ago, meaning you could go look at our parents, great grandparents, and you know, their videos and see how are they thinking, what were they doing, what was their business like, what were their hobbies. You know, that's really cool. I mean, that's priceless. You'd pay so much money to see that, to have that, see how your grandpa was thinking back then. But they didn't have that. We have that.
Right.
And if we're not shooting these videos and content and putting it out there, or whether it's for business or not, you should be on there, because your grandkid is going to look at these videos and be like, oh, look at this. look at what they were talking about back then. Their cars didn't fly. Yeah, their cars weren't even flying yet. You know, they were still on Earth. No, I'm kidding. That's a joke. But yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, because you brought up something before we even started shooting this video, talking about, you know, a lot of agents saying that they're really seeing an uptick in traffic and they're busier and they're selling more. I mean, what are you seeing? What do you see in your office? Yeah,
that's a kind of a trick question, right? So I you know, I brought that up, but I was thinking that, you know, that's everyone's reality is slightly different. And the truth is, we don't know until we look back and we can measure it. If there's not enough metrics for us to measure, then it's hard to say what is really going on in the market. So we have to wait after the end of the month, or 60 days or 90 days, and look back. Okay, where are we year to date as opposed to last year? What are we controlling it against or comparing it against? But people will fall into that because I'll run into agents in my office and or other agents, and they're saying, "Oh, the market's hot. I'm having this career year. It's I'm having this. I'm having that." And that's awesome. If you're someone who two of your listings just went under contract yesterday, and you have a closing next month and closing next week, that's great. However, that's your business, and you're doing a great job with that. That maybe not be indicative of the entire market, because there might be another agent who has 10 listings and not one of them has an offer. So it's more so you can't look. You have to zoom out and look at it outside of yourself, because you could have just had a good week.
Sure.
So it's always you got to wait until you have to measure it. If you don't measure, you don't know. It's like if I'm trying to lose weight, which I am, but I got to measure my food. If I don't measure my food, I don't know if I'm in a deficit or not. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I got a question for you then, because kind of it's tied into it. In this market, people could like to talk about the market and the race and this and that, and I believe those to be honest objections. However, life events happen and people have to sell their homes regardless. What are the common objections that you are hearing about people who they love the new builds that you have here, and maybe they want to move forward or they seem interested but they're not pulling the trigger? What are they telling you that's stopping them from pulling the trigger?
I think honestly the biggest thing right now is that builders all have something to offer. If it's looking at the same type of builder, a production builder, a big builder that has money, that can spend money to buy down the rate, that can spend money to give towards closing costs. We're all doing something very similar in a different way though, versus, they might be giving 20,000 over here. We might be giving 10, but we're doing this rate, buy down or whatever. So I think there's a lot of confusion. And because there's a lot of inventory on the market, also with the resales that maybe have amenities in a pool, like amenities, I'm talking about a pool on, with the home, with the resale. Maybe it's on the water, with boating access or something like that,
But see, I think that's interesting though, because those are great incentives, right? Now, if all the builders are offering this, but people are still not buying houses, I mean, people are buying houses, right? But there's a lot of people who want to, and yet something is stopping them. There's a fear that's, paralyzing them. And maybe they don't know what it is, and we just need to work on what type of questions can we ask them to help them realize, hey, this is a great deal. The builder is going to buy down your rate. Rates are at 7%. You get 4.5%. Come on now. If the national rate just did that on its own, we're going back to bidding.
Right. But if a seller has to sell their home and they can't get someone to even walk through the door, that's probably a price problem, right? But let's just say they think that their home is worth 400, and maybe it is worth 400, but you have 5 other homes listed in the neighborhood that are below 400, then even though the home that sold 3 months ago at 410, what's really driving the value of the price today, right? Isn't it like the homes that are kind of on the market, currently listed?
Yeah.
Because who's going to walk into a $400,000 home when I can get the same one down the street at $350 or whatever that is?
Yeah, similar home,
so
same neighborhood.
I think that is kind of holding people back as well. They want to move, but they can't get out of their current situation.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So I'm hearing that you're having a lot of people who want to buy, but they need to sell first, and they're having a hard time selling, and then that's taking away their confidence.
Yeah. And they need a certain amount to be able to buy another home, whether it's putting money down so their payment is lower or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point, because I tell you what, there's been a couple instances already where some sellers have to bring a little bit of money to the table. We've had a couple people come to me and tell me that, when their home got appraised, that it came in lower. So those are things that were not common 2-3 years ago, weren't common 6 months ago, but maybe that's coming where it's something that we need to be prepared for, and just educate people or have the conversation with people and just let them know that, hey, we would love to sell your home at this price, or a buyer. I'm sure if we found the right buyer who'd pay that price and you break even or make some money on your home, that's great. However, in this market, if they really want to sell it, it just depends on their motivation, right? Because if they're selling it just to sell it because they want to move down the road, I don't think that's a strong enough motivation,
Well, and if someone really needs to sell, I do have people that walk in that maybe they lost their spouse and they can't take care of the home with the pool and the big yard and that anymore. But to your point, they would have to bring money to closing. What if they don't have the money to bring to closing? Then what do they do? Then you're really stuck in a bad situation where you have to stay in that home and continue to pay the mortgage or whatever.
I'm sure there's, some course of action. I mean, that's where people have, because that was the case in 15 years ago, right? People were doing short sales left and right. They were selling homes short of what they owed the bank. And so there's, it's unfortunate. Now, I don't think we're in that market by any means. But I think it does go back to the motivations. I mean, you will do that if that's what you have to do. You'll figure it out. It's like you couldn't, raise up $10,000 to save. You couldn't save $10,000 to save your life, but then, a loved one, gets cancer, and next thing you know, you've got to GoFundMe and you've raised $25,000 in 5 weeks. So sometimes, if the motivation is high enough or meaningful enough to you, you will find a way to get it done. So I think maybe that's more the conversation. What type of questions we can ask people and ask ourselves too, because me and you are in the market. We like to buy and sell properties for ourselves. We are very much in the market with everyone else as owners and sellers and buyers of real estate, investors. We do a little bit of everything. What kind of questions are we asking ourselves to find our motivations? And I think it's got to be open-ended questions. We got to ask them. Instead of just trying to come up with the answer all the time. Someone's trying to sell their home or they need to get this number, asking them why is that number so important to them, or if they say something, well, this is how I see the market, and instead of saying, well, no, you're wrong, the market says I'm the expert, it could be like, well, what makes you say that? And you could ask somebody that, and that's a simple question to ask somebody. But if I said, Christina, what makes you say that? You can't just give me a yes or no answer. You gotta now. And maybe it's self-discovery. They have to think about, okay, what triggered them to say that? And you might have to ask 2 or 3 follow-up questions.
I agree. So you need them to answer the question for themselves and realize it. You might know the answer already, but they need to hear themselves say it.
And it might be a different answer than what we thought, but like you said, a lot of times we might try to solve, and I see that a lot. We do a lot of practice conversations with other agents in my brokerage, and that's a common thing I would see is when we're doing the practice, it's supposed to be practicing, asking questions and getting comfortable trying to find the underlying motivation. But a lot of times it's like a solve. We're trying to get into a solve and walk into the answer that we want, and that's not necessarily the right thing to do. You have to ask them the honest question and find out what it is that is, because things happen, right? Like you said, someone could be leaving somebody, right? Like, who cares? No one cares about what the market is if you're getting divorced and you need to sell the house to start a new life. You're just saying, let's just get this thing over with and let's move on with our lives. You're not thinking, oh, you know what? We're getting divorced, but we're just gonna suffer in this relationship, or not do the thing that we need to do because of the market. At that point, who cares about the market?
Sure.
That's surface level market and interest rate, this and that. Someone gets a new high paying job and it's in California and they need to get over there. They're not going to say, oh, you know what? I'm going to turn down that job because I'm waiting for the rates to go down to 5%. Right now they're at 6.875.
Right.
Whatever it may be. So you got to find out what those are and just make sure that we have those conversations. Be honest with ourselves. Yeah. I think that's serious stuff.
I think it is too.
Yeah. So okay, what are things that people are seeing with CDDs? Because we don't talk about CDDs enough, and I felt like 20 years ago, a lot of the homes and developments we saw 20 years ago didn't have this community development, whatever. I don't even, I forget what, district, yeah. And it wasn't a thing. You had an HOA, and now it's HOA, and you have to ask, what's a CDD? Because you need to know it.
Yeah.
And, I've gotten comfortable with it, but it's just, why is it that homes 20, 30 years ago did not have a CDD?
I don't know. I can't answer that question honestly. I haven't done enough research on the history of it.
Yeah.
I just know that the developer, not the builder, is the one that decides if they're going to pass on the cost. So basically, it's a cost of putting the infrastructure in. I heard an agent tell their buyer one day, listen, if you want to live in a beautiful community like Wilmot Park or Westport, you're going to you have to pay the money to have that community. The city was not going to just build something really pretty like that without having a cost to it. So, they have to be able to put the infrastructure in and the underground utilities.
But the developer, maybe you answered it right there, because the developer, they buy it, right? There's a big plot of land. I mean, Westport, right here, where we're at, there were different streets here. There was no pond over here.
Right.
A developer bought it and realigned the streets and dug out and put this and created a bunch of different communities. And then collectively, all those communities have to pay an extra cost.
Right.
But they didn't do that. The developer just built it out, and maybe the cost is paid for. So you said they're passing on the cost. I guess it's easier for the developer now. Hey, I can develop more communities, but I'm not paying the entire development cost, and I have to pass it on, because some of these CDDs are, they're not forever. Am I? Some of them are.
They're not forever.
Yeah.
However, like in Westport, there's an operational side of the CDD and a bond portion, and that's usually the way that it's figured out. So the bond portion, which was 30 years, that can end unless the developer decides to extend the bond. But then there's always an operational portion of it. So if the CDD covers the ponds that are in Westport, if something has to be, fixed because it broke, then the CDD is going to cover that, and that operational budget may increase for the next year. So when the bond portion dies off, there's still going to be an operational portion of it. So I always tell people, just assume that you're always going to have that fee in there.
Yeah.
Because it will never fully go away.
Yeah. So that's good to explain that, because I didn't know that. So the operational is almost like I don't want to say a reserve, but HOA has the reserve, but the operation is the cost to keep it up to date and operating well. The operating expenses.
It's kind of like another HOA.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. But so maybe that's what it was, where the builders were paying the total cost, and they weren't bonding, because bonding is a debt.
Right.
So you are selling the debt to investors on it, but so they're bonding it out, and they're passing the debt on to the owners. It's a common practice. It's not just a one developer thing. No. It's almost common practice at this point. So people have to be aware of CDs. So that's a question that they need to be aware of. And they're thinking, oh, I got pre-approved. It says my monthly payment. Oh wow, that's low. I could afford it. But they're just thinking principal and interest, right? And normally a lender might say, well, PITI, right? Principal, interest, taxes, insurance. And they're not thinking of insurance, but then you're not thinking about HOA and CDD. So you need to add those two into the PITI, right? So there's a lot of expenses that come into it. So that's where, I guess, negotiations. This is a good buyer's market. You really got to negotiate your tail off, because where are things you can shop? You can't really change the CDD or the HOA, but you can shop your interest, your rate.
Yeah, you can shop your
buy down your rate.
You can shop the price. A lot of people. I posted something the other day just about buyers taking a long time to make a decision. Yeah. Right. And it was interesting how people got so stirred up by this one little post.
Yeah.
Verbal negotiations.
Yeah.
Right? We do verbal negotiations because if we're going to go back and forth, we don't want to spend time putting it on paper to have to rewrite something, right? So, I totally lost my
No, but I get that people don't want to waste time going on paper.
Yeah.
But devil's advocate of that a little bit. I know some people who say, "Oh, well, and I'm probably guilty of it too. Is, hey, if they're serious, they'll give us a written offer, right, versus a verbal, because you might come to an agreement verbally, and if it comes to an agreement too quick, they might start second guess. Maybe we're getting the short straw over here. We're not winning out, and then they don't give you the written offer. There's that fear.
That's what it was. So this person had negotiated verbally with us, and we came to an agreement after probably a week or so.
Wow.
It already took me a week.
Yeah.
But then they ghosted me, and they came back 3 weeks later and said, "Well, I want that same offer that we negotiated 3 weeks ago." And I was like, "That offer doesn't exist now. Like, how can you wait for 3 weeks?" So this person that commented on this post said, "Well, I mean, I've done that because I want to see what another builder is going to give me. I kind of pit them against each other." So I think people are also doing that very same thing. They want to see what's the best offer that they can get.
Yeah.
Without really understanding behind the scenes, if you just use your money, we've talked about using your money in a smarter, better way.
Yeah, we have.
That you could get a better monthly payment in so many different ways, and not just by price.
Yeah. And you know what? That's like a deal chaser. Maybe not everyone's like that. They're just trying to find the best deal possible. So they're trying to, verbally negotiate with multiple builders. And I get that. I understand that. There's people like that. And then the other side of it is someone wants to be in this neighborhood because grandbaby lives 5 minutes away. So, maybe they won't look at this other builder, even though they love that house, because it's 20 minutes away and they don't want to be more than 20 minutes away to see their grandkids. So it all ties back to motivation, right? What's driving them? For that person, motivation is all dollars and cents. They're seeing it as an investment, and you should always think about the finance part of it too, and tied with that. So there's a lot of good things, to unpack here for some people, and to continue this conversation, with other people, clients trying to buy or sell into this market, So next time then, we'll keep that going for next time.
Thanks, Omar.
All right.